Hey YouTube, what's going on? It's Adam here with Retro Repairs, and today we've got another repair video. So what we've got in front of me is a Sega Genesis 32X. Now, for those of you who don't really know all about what this was an add-on made by Sega shortly after the Sega Genesis was made, well, a little bit after actually, and just before the Sega Saturn was rumored to come out. So this little add-on, the idea was to bring 32-bit gaming to the Sega Genesis. Inevitably, it didn't really do terribly well, and it had a limited game selection, but it's still a pretty cool add-on even to today. But this isn't a review of the 32X, this is actually a repair. So what I'm going to do is show you how the 32X works, and see what's wrong with this particular one. So I picked this up on eBay. I think it was about 35 bucks or 30 bucks or something like that. And they just said that they couldn't get any games to work. So we're going to give this a test, and there's a couple common culprits in this. For all we know, it might just need a cleaning. It looks pretty good when I take a quick peek in there, but there's a few things we're going to try. So firstly, I'm going to show you that 32X, the system I have and the setup I have, does work properly. So the 32X will actually allow you to play both regular Sega Genesis games and special 32X cartridges, which are built to use the 32X graphics. So how it works, if you insert a regular Genesis game, it just acts as a pass-through. So it'll play the game normally. It doesn't really use any of the special chips in the 32X, it just plays the Genesis game through the Genesis. However, if you install a Sega 32X cartridge, what actually happens is the Sega does a lot of the processing, and then it renders things like the backgrounds. The 32X does a little bit of extra processing. So the Genesis will render the original image, send it to the 32X, which overlays, there's some 32-bit add-on graphics, and then it sends it all to the TV. So both of them are working in unison. So as you can see, these cartridges work. So now, let's try set up that new 32X. So I'm just going to adjust you a little bit here, so you can see how this actually gets set up. Alright, so in the back of it, it has its own power supply. So in my Tower of Power setup, I actually have to have 3 power supplies. One for the Genesis, one for the 32X, and one for the Sega CD. There's a special patch cable, which is absolutely required. If you don't have it, you're not going to be able to play 32X games properly. So unplug that. And then this is the video out. This is the same video out that the Sega Genesis Model 2 uses. So that's the working one. That's my normal 32X. And let's try the new one that I picked up. So again, patch cable goes in here. Video out goes here. And then the power. Alright, so let's try, first go, let's just try a regular Sega Genesis cartridge, see if the pass-through mode works. I'm not picking up the TV. There we go. Okay, so I got that license screen, but not much else. So that tells me, and odds are that the cart pins, or the cartridge slot pins, are probably just needing cleaning. But let's try just reseat it. Still nothing. So one thing I'm going to try is get some isopropyl alcohol. Just wet these pins here. And then push it in and out. Just kind of let it dry a little bit. And see if that does the trick. And it does not. So there might be something that we need to take a look at in there. I'm just going to try a 32X cartridge just for fun. I don't expect anything to happen here, but let's find out. All right, looks like it's time to open this up. All right, so the 32X is pretty straightforward to open. We're going to flip it over, and there, I believe, are 4 screws on the bottom here, and it's just a standard number 2 Phillips screwdriver that you need. So I'm just going to remove those and then crack open the shell. So take the 4 screws and just set those aside. Just make note of the color of these screws when you take them out. They're fairly small, little black screws, so just so that you know where these can go back. So now the top just lifts straight up. There's nothing attached to it there, and this reveals the circuitry underneath. So now we've got to take off this heatsink. Now, or not the heatsink, sorry, this RF shielding. So all it takes is, again, number 2 screwdriver, and just removing any screw that you see here. So right here, I just want to point out there's a little bit of some sort of foam insulation. Now I don't recall if this was there on the previous 32X that I worked on, but just going to have to peel this off in order to get access to these screws here. Truthfully, I'm not sure why it's there, but who knows? Don't know if it's necessary or not, but we're just going to take it off and try and remember to put it back. Okay, so with all the screws removed, we should be able to just lift this straight up and can place that off to the side. So, couple things to note. I do see a small amount of corrosion here. Could be due to just moisture kind of getting in here. There could be some bad capacitors, but this is mainly around here, and I don't see any capacitors here. There's some caps up here which are not swollen, and I don't see any residue on the board, so I mean the caps could be replaced, but I doubt that's the issue here. So we're just going to continue with just removing this board. So I'm going to remove the cartridge slot connector, or the screws for the connector, sorry. The cartridge slot, I believe, does not lift out. So the cart slot has a little bit longer screws, so again, just make a mental note or write it down if you need to, that those long screws go in the cart slot. And then there's 2 more screws, and those are right down here. And this holds the actual cartridge connector into place, the part that you actually insert into the console. Then there's 2 more. Sorry, these also appear to hold the shell into the cartridge slot connector. Okay, so everything should be pretty loose here. So there's a couple common culprits with the 32X, and those are these ribbon connectors. So we're just going to remove these first. Just want to grab it and pull straight back if you can. Sometimes they can be a little bit of a pain to get out. All right, I'm going to leave those and come back to them. I'm going to try just remove everything else first. So can lift this all straight up. And this is the bottom part of it, so note that there's this spacer here. Important that you remember to put that back, as that relieves the pressure when you're pushing down, putting the cartridges in the console here. It relieves that pressure on the board so that you're not flexing it. So that's a very important part. And And then this is the actual cart connector part. This comes off with 2 Phillips screws right here, and these are small precision bits. So I'm just going to get my precision screwdriver to remove those. That one should do the trick. Oh, that's a tri-wing. That's why that wasn't grabbing. And this should come just straight up like so. So this is kind of interesting. So something that is very common with a lot of old Sega consoles is assembly line repairs. So as you can see here, there's some wires running down to these pads. We're just going to check to make sure they're connected to everything, but this does not necessarily mean that this was a mod or an aftermarket repair. These, I've seen a few different fixes after the fact, and I don't know why Sega couldn't really get it right the first time, but this is not uncommon at all. Like this here seems to be sending ground from the board to this, so I don't know why you couldn't include that in the ribbon connectors. The orange one here, who knows what that does. Maybe that sends 5 volts. Not a clue. But we got to keep in mind not to bump those and hit those and knock them out, because that could cause problems. Another interesting thing to note, so this cartridge connector, it is soldered in place here. So these pins down here, they're all soldered on. So you can't lift this up like a Sega or like a Nintendo one. And you see these connectors here that go through the board, and there's some solder pads, but they didn't solder anything. So they're just kind of floating loose there. Not sure why they wouldn't have soldered those on. You'd think you'd want to add a little bit extra stability to that, but whatever. So now that this is off, I'm just going to try and see if I can lift this straight out with my screwdriver. That's in there pretty good. We'll try it the other way. There we go. Starting to come. All right, so that's disconnected. Now just going to try and remove it from the very top here. That is in there mighty tightly. Almost worried about removing that because will I be able to get it back in? Well, I'm going to try leave those for now and clean up these pins first. These are pretty common. If they ever become unseated, they will cause issues, and that's the most common cause of failure on these, is just those pins not reading on the ribbon connectors. So what I'm going to do for that, get a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and just clean those connectors, put it back in. You just want to remove any type of oils, greases, anything that could contaminate the contact here. And looks like we have to do both sides. Okay. So we'll just try and insert them again. Hopefully these go in nicely. Oh, those went in no problem. So I am going to try and get this top one out. I guess not. I really don't want to rip that either, so. Alright, we'll leave it as is for now, unless I continue to have issues. All right, so while we've got this open, we're going to give the cart pins a solid cleaning as well. And these are pretty good. The thing with the 32X is usually once you put it in, it's not like a normal cartridge where you're putting it in and removing it. Usually you just insert it and then you just leave it, and that's what your Sega looks like from now on. So these are actually in pretty good shape. All right, that looks all right as well. So let's do a quick test on the console itself, just to see if this happens to have resolved anything. So just gonna put the shell lightly over top of this. Wrong way. That would be a problem. There we go. All right, so let's go set up the Sega again, just to see if this makes any difference whatsoever. All right, so we've got this sitting in place here. Let's turn it on to see what we got. So we're getting the license screen again, which is good. All right, and we're getting Boogerman, so that's a positive thing. So let's try a 32X card again now. All right, so this will be a good test to make sure that all of the components on the board are still good. The 32X, like I said, can play Sega Genesis games usually without issues, even if there is a problem with something on here like the added memory or whatever they put on here to make it work, so the extra processors. So let's try the 32X game and see that everything else is good. So power on, license screen, and booting into the game. So let's do a quick test to make sure that it looks like it's responding properly. So far, so good. It's always interesting coming back to this, as although it was probably really cool back in the day, all these polygon graphics really reminds me kind of Star Fox on the Super Nintendo, but we've come a long way since then, that's for sure. Well, looks like it clearly works, so let's reassemble this guy and do one final test just to make sure everything's put together properly, but I would consider this definitely a success. Okay, so reassembly should be pretty straightforward, I think, / hope. So we've already gotten the cartridge connector part here lined up, so I believe what we'll want to do is probably screw this back together. No, it's not quite lined up properly. I feel like this can be a pain. There we go. So you need to get those, make sure you get these posts lined up. There we go. And I'm just going to put those screws in right now. Can't recall actually on the top of my head if that was the order, but it's going to be. And again, just keep in mind when you're holding this, be sure to support the board as well, because all of this is now hinging on those ribbon connectors and those wires that are running from between the two boards. So you don't want to put a lot of pressure on that, as you can, in theory, you could rip stuff clean off, but you just cause all sorts of problems. All right, so that I think is all right. So this should, if all goes according to plan, just go straight in here now, hopefully. There we go. So that is sitting nicely. All right, so now I'm going to install the the long screws for the cart slot. All right, next I'm going to put on these 4 screws right here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this will hold the cartridge slot connector onto the main part of the body. All right, one thing I almost forgot to do is just to try and clean off some of that kind of leftover corrosion that was down here. So there's not very much. I'm just going to use a Q-tip and some rubbing alcohol. The actual board itself here isn't corroding, but the shielding here had a little bit of rust on it. So the rust just really transferred over, and we can again wipe some of this up. I would probably go back with a little bit of very, very fine sandpaper and just try and grind off what you can. If it doesn't come off nicely, this is coming up not too bad. Still not perfect, so I might go back and do that after the fact. I'm going to do it right now. Okay, so I have some 1500 grit sandpaper, and this is really just used for buffing up paint, automotive paint jobs. And this will work fine for just trying to scrape off some of the very light rust that's on here. There we go, that should be all right. You don't want to go too overboard and start removing too much of the metal here, but just try and clean it up. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want it to continue oxidizing, and there we go. That should be more than fine. So this is going to go, I believe, like so. And now we have all of those screws to put on. So I'm just going to fast forward through that part. I'm sure you don't want to watch me do it. All right, so I got all those screws put back on. One thing you don't want to forget is that little piece of rubber. Again, I don't know why that was there, but let's put her back just in case. It really doesn't touch anything. So I don't know. Maybe it's there because of this inductor here, and it's just a way of, I don't even know, because this wouldn't block any type of RF, so who knows. But put it back anyways. Top goes on, and then 4 screws on the bottom. Then we're going to test this one last time just to make sure that everything still works well. I didn't knock anything loose or anything during reassembly. All right, and there we are. So that's good to go, and that's ready to test. So let's head back to the Sega and see, just test, make sure everything works well. All right, so one final test here, using the same game on that system. Power on, license, and booting into the game. So we are good to go. So that was a fairly easy fix. Didn't require any actual soldering or hardware repair. It's more or less just a cleaning, and that's very common with these 32Xs. The 32X market's actually pretty hot right now. Even a game like Virtua Fighter probably sells for 20 bucks. These consoles themselves, they sell as high as $100. If you include power and the patch cable and everything with them. So for 35 bucks, I mean, I should be able to easily double that, I think, if I were to resell this guy. So definitely a good buy, and they're usually pretty hardy. So like I said, the most common fault is just those ribbon connectors. So hopefully you found the video interesting. Be sure to leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think. Like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel. It'll really help me out. So thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.